This is episode 383 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it's a eventful week we've had, and for a change, COVID is not really the top of the agenda, although it is worth noting that as we record, it is March 8th, 2022, and that is practically the second anniversary of when things really started to change in New Mexico. The date that will live in infamy in my mind is, of course, March the 10th, yes. 2020, and it is a date worth noticing, and we would be remiss if we did not mention it. But there's many things going on, and last night at Albuquerque City Council, something that surprised the heck out of me, quite frankly, at least the 6-3 vote, but a plastic bag ban repeal passed 6-3, which, assuming that it holds, maybe we get a veto from the mayor, but 6-3 will get it past the veto. The new look Albuquerque City Council may have struck a blow for freedom yesterday.
Yeah, freedom of choice with regard to whether you use a plastic bag or not. Very interesting one, Paul. It's just, it's done for under the guise of environmentalism. And, the more I look at this, I just don't buy it. It just seems like these bag bans are basically just about control. It's a political issue. They're made out of plastic. Of course, that has to be better for the environment, much less. We don't have to consider all the facts that the alternatives are paper bags that are larger. They require trees. They require more shipping costs, a lot of things. And this is a kind of a good news for Albuquerque. It's, freedom is winning out over micro government control.
Yeah, and the question was not so much whether this was going to pass. Most people probably thought it would pass on a 5-4 vote, which is not enough to get past a prospective or expected veto from Mayor Keller. A 6-3 vote would do that. So we shall see. This is just the beginning of the potential policies that could have a significant impact on our city in different directions. It's an issue that Rio Grande Foundation has worked diligently on for a few years, and we're very happy to see it done. So, people sometimes say, Guessing you're always so negative. Well, do the right thing, and I won't be so negative. And I'll just remind people that less than 1% of misdirected plastic, according to our world in data, comes from North America. So
yeah, that's all of North America. And,
Yeah.
and to be misdirected and get into the ocean, Paul, you need a big river, and we have a little river here. So I have a feeling it's the Mississippi probably, or rivers in Florida and New York account for a lot of that. So yes, to say that we now hate the oceans and hate the wildlife, that just is not the case, because we're not the problem.
Yeah, and to the extent that you see litter around and that plastic bags are the issue, I would say that you've got to crack down on the people actually doing the littering. I know that's a big push for our police department, more of an education issue than an enforcement issue. But we had. Last week, we talked about $20 million in COVID advertising. When's the last time you saw a Don't Litter TV spot, or even really, you maybe see a billboard once in a while, but the emphasis is definitely not there. And, if those laws aren't enforced on the homeless population, and that's where the city really does get trashed, is by those folks camping out and or spending tremendous time on the medians of highways and byways. Those, I think, are some of the serious efforts that need to be undertaken, as well as the mask problem. There are masks and PPE, and my wife and I live over by a Presbyterian urgent care. It's not so bad now, but boy, first month or so of COVID, it was 24/7. It was wall to wall, lines of people showing up at that place, cars wrapped around multiple blocks. And so was the junk, the trash, and that stuff. I'm all about picking up, trash and especially aluminum cans, which are worth some money. But I'm not taking somebody's mask and picking that one up.
Yeah, it is interesting the impacts that these have, and Paul, yeah, it is tough to have an anti-trash campaign in a place like Albuquerque when the biggest problem is one that a lot of the policies have been implemented by the city itself that makes it worse. Maybe not as bad as our friends in Los Angeles or Seattle or Portland, but it is pretty bad here in Albuquerque, the homeless situation, and what that brings.
Yeah. Now, ironically, if I'm sure you didn't, but I was on the city council Zoom call for 5.5 hours last night. The nice thing about Zoom is that you can do other things with your life while you are on the Zoom. In some ways, that's much more reasonable way to spend your time than cooling your heels in city council chambers. But they'll be going back live, I'm sure, in the near future. However, the industry that gets trashed, so to speak, with regard to plastic bags is none other than oil and gas. And right now, talk about a transition here. Oil in particular, specifically oil that goes into fueling your automobile in the form of gasoline, that is the issue that people are really, Americans are up in arms about. Ironically, it's basically like COVID left off, and then suddenly this huge international crisis with Russia and oil prices cropped up. As we record, prices jumped by another $5 approximately today. On the barrel, $124.30 is what Yahoo Finance lists the price of a barrel of crude at. Mileage may vary, so to speak, based on West Texas and Brent, but prices are just going up, up, up at the pump and everywhere in between.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago where we had a close of the financial market for oil in negative territory to close out contracts.
You look like Rasputin on that one there, Wally.
Yeah.
Prices will come back, I promise. Thanks, Wally.
Yeah, that was the understatement of the world. And so, yeah, the interesting we're in interesting territory, and I've heard people talking about maybe that the impact of oil prices and how it translates to gasoline is overplayed for the typical family. And possibly, I'm not saying it is, Paul, but that could be true directly. But keep in mind, everything has oil price in it. Every product, every service has an energy component in it. And, the last time we had oil prices even a little higher than we have right now, that was in the 2007, 2008 period, and the economy came to a screeching halt once that happened. So, yeah. Now, Paul, you'll know that oil prices will come down when you hear oil will never be below $100 again. And thank goodness, knock on wood, I haven't heard that. But oil prices fluctuate. They've done it in the past. They will do it in the future. And, it's one of those, despite the rhetoric of some groups with regard to the fact, well, we don't even need oil in a couple of years. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's unfortunately, but using reality as any yardstick, we will be using oil for a long, long time, decades, likely centuries for a source of energy, and volatility is just part of that.
So for the comedy portion of our program, You know how bad the price of a barrel of oil is now, Wally?
No, I don't.
Even the nation's leading electric car manufacturer, billionaire guru, is advocating for more oil and gas production. One Elon Musk was on Twitter, which he uses very effectively
Yeah.
these days. He was out saying that we need more drilling, more production. That's when you know the price of a barrel of oil has gotten out of control. When somebody who is basically the pioneer of an industry that directly competes with uh, products using oil and gas is actually, supporting that industry and trying to say, hey, look, it's time to get things moving a little bit better.
Yeah, because he knows there's a lot of costs for oil that go into his product, both directly and indirectly. He also, I think, rightly so, realizes that the Tesla automobile is not an inexpensive piece of equipment, and it takes a pretty high level of income and a pretty robust economy for people to have the money to purchase those. So I have a feeling all of that is playing into it. But yes, that does fall under the category, Paul, irony of ironies.
Yeah. Now, for more details, the Wall Street Journal has a excellent editorial from March the 4th, Biden's fossil fuel blockade. And there's a big controversy right now. It's not really a big controversy in the sense that most people who follow oil and gas and the industry and know a thing or two understand that there is a lot that Joe Biden could do to impact prices in both the medium and long term. Maybe not the very, very short term, but definitely there are opportunities for U.S. production to be ramped up and prices to come down. But this article really shows how the Biden administration is not helping matters. And starting off with, and I know she's not part of the Biden administration, but Nancy Pelosi definitely works hand in glove with the Biden administration many times. Uh, she said that she's not for drilling on public lands. Whoa, somebody tell Nancy that not just New Mexico, but many other states have a lot of oil and gas drilling on public lands. So it's, I don't know if you'd heard that little remark from the Speaker of the House, who probably should know better.
And Paul, I did not hear that, but it is ironic, just the policy as it plays out. I'm reading articles in places like Vox. Yes, I am in the deep, dark areas of the internet, speculating that Biden might take a trip to Saudi Arabia to encourage them to produce more oil. And if he doesn't take a trip, that doesn't, that's not the only way to wield influence, but it certainly is a strong signal. And my thought there was maybe he ought to take a trip to Midland and Hobbs and see what could be done there.
Well, they're also looking at Venezuela. That's also according to a
Yeah.
separate Wall Street Journal article. Venezuela's oil production virtually dried up because of essentially communist socialist mismanagement of the entire process. Of course, the United States has had some pretty strict import limits on Venezuela and their oil, and due to the makeup of that oil being very heavy and sludgy, they don't have many places that are able to process it and make it marketable on the world stage. So, Saudi Arabia, we certainly can have our moral qualms about them, but the United States has had moral qualms about Venezuela, and now there's talk in numerous media outlets that the Biden administration's really working with the Maduro regime, which is a pretty distasteful group of folks. And you've got the rest of this article talking about how a judge slapped down the Biden administration's inflated social cost of carbon, which is essentially their politicized way of trying to assign some cost to the CO2 emitted. Very, very difficult stuff, and I don't have a right answer. There is no right answer. It's virtually impossible, but you have to balance any social costs against all the social benefits, and that's something that these folks don't want to do. But that decision has caused the White House to say it's halted permitting work on at least 18 wells on federal oil and gas leases in New Mexico and new lease sales, according to the Wall Street Journal. Interior has been slow rolling oil and gas permits since Biden took office. Of course, we had the ban for several months until the judge in June struck it down. And then Biden hasn't held any onshore lease sales and is the only president in 2 decades not to have done so in a given year. There's liquefied natural gas terminals, which would benefit Europe. Those have been sitting at the Department of Energy and FERC, according to the American Petroleum Institute. So the thing with oil and gas markets is that it may not be something that you can change tomorrow or next week, but when you start opening things up and encouraging as opposed to discouraging production, you set market forces in motion that start to reduce the price of the product in the medium and longer term. Biden has done virtually nothing serious about this, and so that's why we are where we are.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's a good way to look at short, medium, and long term. And in the short term, actually, those 18 permits probably aren't going to make a discernible difference of any kind. And in fact, notwithstanding the fact that they haven't done any new lease sales, there are permits that are being held. And New Mexico's back to right at the cusp of 100 drilling rigs in operation. So Texas is the big player in the U.S. The U.S. has 650 drilling rigs, but of those, almost 100 are in New Mexico, 308 in Texas. But this policy could go, if it goes a couple of years and there's additional regulations and other things on both new and existing production of oil and gas, guess what happens? The price could keep going up and up and up. And then to tie it into the social cost of energy, I think Europe and Germany in particular might be realizing what the social cost of relying on countries that are, shall we say, don't have their best interests at heart and aren't necessarily free market open players. And so we've seen that Germany's had problems with their renewable energy plans in the past. And they're to the point where they're getting very, very concerned, opening up their coal plants, some of which had been shuttered. And so there's a lot going on there because the rhetoric is all well and good to say, okay, wind and solar and battery by tomorrow. But the reality is just nowhere close to that. And when you have to deal with the fact is if, they were in a shape to do that in any way, they'd say, oh, we don't care about your natural gas coming from Russia to Germany. We're set to handle it. But the reality is far, far different. And in the United States, the same way, we have a lot of production, but we have tapped the brakes pretty strongly in our country relative to what production maybe could be. And with the price where it is now, if they would just kind of get out of the way just a little bit, we could go a long way towards making the medium term much better in terms of the price of oil. And interestingly, do it in such a way where the American workers benefit, American taxpayers benefit, and probably the environment benefits because we do oil and gas production here with extremely stringent environmental controls compared to other places in the world.
Yep, and it would be great for every state that produces oil and gas, not to mention even the other states throughout the country that would just benefit from the United States being an exporter of major items that are in demand on the global stage. European countries that are beholden to Putin, also a good thing. So there's a lot of benefits there if U.S. gets serious, but unfortunately, the administration is not. And there are some articles. You mentioned Vox. There's one on Yahoo News, the myth of U.S. energy independence. And sometimes I wonder, this is from Monday, March the 7th. And I wonder if these people are just putting these things out there in order to sow doubt and kind of muddy the waters.
Or it makes for good clickbait. People will
Yeah.
read their articles because with headlines
So
like that.
it is true that the United States has technically never been independent. I mentioned Venezuela. Venezuela is a country that shipped their crude to the United States for processing. Therefore, we're importing. We also import from Canada. We haven't, at least according to Yahoo News, produced as much oil in the United States as we consume. We consume somewhat more. This is a chart from Yahoo Finance in this article, The Myth of U.S. Energy Independence. Regardless of that, there's nothing stopping U.S. producers. We have plenty of energy, and specifically oil, that we could have access to, not just here in New Mexico on federal lands, but you have Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, which is a tiny fraction of land in northern Alaska. You have offshore drilling and outer continental shelf. You have a lot of places where we could do a lot better. And really, this administration has not helped the cause. So the critics of kind of the people who are putting the stickers on the gas pump saying, let's go Brandon, or thank you Biden, or I did that, or whatever may be. It may be simplistic, but it also has a lot of truth to it. And the Biden administration could do a lot more. Unfortunately, they're not. And there's a lot of people, mostly the radical environmental types, who are kind of helping to push them in a bad way. U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich tweeted, "Banning Russian oil and gas imports is the right thing to do." That's the latest news on this front. "We cannot let energy profits finance Vladimir Putin's unprovoked and unjustified war in Ukraine." Fine so far. This is step one. Step two is ending the world's dangerous long-term reliance on oil. For the sake of our national security, we need to make urgent investments to scale up our manufacturing of fossil fuel technologies like heat pumps and electric vehicles, and replace our consumption of oil and foreign gas with clean, pollution-free energy sources. Martin Heinrich is flat out of touch. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. The costs of doing that will be prohibitive. And
and talk about a long-term solution in terms of the just the amount of raw material and what it would take to, and again, you can move towards that at any speed you want,
Right.
but, the speed required to have that be significant is, beyond what I believe our country or any country is capable of.
Yeah. And to the extent that Biden takes that advice, it will cost him and the Democrats dearly in November, I believe. Unfortunately, Martin Heinrich is not up for re-election in November. Clearly, his desire is not to represent a state like New Mexico. He should really be representing a state that has no energy, at least energy that it produces, because his policies are extraordinarily out of touch and harmful for our particular state.
Yeah, and Paul, a real quick point regarding, quote unquote energy independent. I'll take Yahoo's word for it. We're not energy independent. But believe me, we are a lot closer than we have been in the not too distant past. And just arbitrarily pulled off daily production in December of 2000, 5,800,000 barrels. And that's December of 2000. And again, it fluctuated a little lower, a little higher over the years. But right now, in the most recent data is December 2021, 11,567,000 barrels of oil. So, from 5.8 million to 11.6 million in that period. No, maybe we're not energy independent and that we still import it, but our energy security, if things get really, really, really ugly, are far better than they were, just 20, 22 years ago.
No, I totally agree, and I do think, I guess, if the only thing I would say is that the focus on independence is overwrought. It should be, we have access to this product. We should be using it and allowing people to access it, and it would have salutary impacts both economically, from a foreign policy perspective, and numerous other ways, not just for the United States but for Western Europe. And the fact that we're not, and we're doing it based on such flimsy evidence and argumentation, is really the problem. So
Yeah, and then Paul, even if we could just use quote unquote our energy, there are efficiencies to be gained by importing energy and simultaneously exporting it. The
exactly.
makeup of the drilling, or excuse me, the refinery infrastructure, primarily along the Gulf Coast of Texas. It's just more efficient for us to refine certain types of oil and export others to other places. So,
Yeah. All right, we're going to change gears here, and we're going to talk about back to Albuquerque. Actually, Albuquerque Public Schools spending FY20, so fiscal year 2020, by our calculations, if you take Albuquerque Public Schools' overall budget, $1.475 billion, divided by the 79,366 students they have accounted for, you come up with $18,594. Now, we are going to be pulling apart APS's budget some more. They're getting even more money out of this, and not just Albuquerque Public Schools, but all districts, uh, out of the latest budget and teacher raises and the whole 9 yards. But in FY 2022, the count is $1.658 billion to educate only 72,500 students. So the student population from fiscal year 2020 to 2022 went from 79,366 to 72,500. So a drop of just about 7,000 students. I'm sure COVID had a lot to do with that, but the population had been declining. The FY 2022 APS budget per student, $22,877. That is a lot of money, and it's only going up as the student population continues to go down. I don't know if there's a political end game here, in the sense that where will it stop, but uh, we're spending a whole lot of money for an education system that a whole lot of people don't find to be particularly valuable.
Paul, and have you dug into those numbers enough to know how much of that is like federal COVID dollars flowing directly and through the state? And, it's one of those, there's no question that the government entities, including schools, were salted with money during COVID, as were many other organizations. And, you know, will this go down because of that? I don't know, but as you alluded to, the fact is continues to suffer from losses of students, and so if it doesn't find a way to control spending, the per student price will certainly go up. And with a lot of what's happened at the state level, costs will go up. And with all deference to our president, it's tough to lower costs when you're raising your labor costs. So.
Yeah, he talked a lot about that in the State of the Union address. And we got, just so you know, this data is directly from the APS budget. You can look at the executive summary on their website. Fiscal year 2022 is July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. So we are coming to the end of the fiscal year, as everybody does at the end of June. And I suspect it's going to be an even bigger number when it comes to in-person. When it comes to APS's budget, it just at some point, I think the challenge or the problem for districts like APS has to be that they lose out on their political support. It's People are just going to be saying, "Why in the heck am I paying all of this money for a district that I really don't use the services of?" And it's going to be interesting to see how this all develops, because that is a lot of money. And the Census Bureau will report its numbers, but we use simple math here at the Rio Grande Foundation. When you take the budget and divide it by the number of students, that is where APS is at, and that's $22,877 as currently stands. Soon to go even higher. But
And
yep,
Paul, there's no question the the educational achievement of these last couple years has definitely suffered. But APS has had, as have many New Mexico schools, have educational achievement issues, and so yes, they talked a lot this last session in Santa Fe about raising the teacher salaries, but if it was there, I certainly didn't catch very much of it talking about, what are we going to do to get our kids back on track educationally in a system where already a lot of them were off track under how things have been led educationally here in New Mexico.
yeah. Now the state. Let's see. We have the highest unemployment rate in the entire United States. Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with December 2021 data. And again, this is at errorsoфenchantment.com. You can find their data. You can find us framing it with the various neighboring states. New Mexico at 5.9%, which is down from pandemic highs, down from a few months ago. Texas is the next highest, which is interesting, at 4.8%. Then you have Colorado at 4.2, Arizona 3.9, Oklahoma 2.8, and Utah 2.3. So New Mexico remains stuck in a bit of low gear when it comes to jobs and recovering, which is amazing considering the health of the oil and gas sector right now. But oil and gas isn't necessarily jobs. It provides a lot of money and ancillary jobs, especially in southeastern New Mexico. But the political classes spend a lot of that money in Santa Fe. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that jobs are automatically created in great numbers when you have a boom in the oil and gas patch. Nebraska has the lowest rate of unemployment, tied there at 2.3 with Utah, our neighbors. And the state that comes in next highest to New Mexico is California at 5.8%. We do beat out the District of Columbia at 6.1, but they ain't a state yet. So we're going with New Mexico dead last among U.S. states in unemployment.
Yeah, and then the other issue is, Paul, the unemployment rate has basically an intention component built in. You have to say you're looking for a job to be included in that. And the other statistic that I like to look at off and on is the workforce or labor participation rate of people who could work. What percentage? Is it a good thing that people are looking for work in New Mexico and haven't gotten it yet, or is this just shows that we have possibly a mismatch of what the jobs are about and what people are looking for? Because there are still, you see the help wanted signs at virtually every business around town, but there is a disconnect there of some portion, and it's interesting to see what really is creating that.
And finally, we did this information request towards the early part of the year, but have the information now. And the New Mexico rail runner ridership, which had been dropping pretty much on a sustained basis, had really fallen off the cliff during COVID. No surprise. Hasn't rebounded much yet. I suspect that's less to do with unemployment than with people no longer being required to work in jobs that force them to sit on a train for 3+ hours a day. Will this situation ever change? Will the rail runner recover its ridership? Quite honestly, I don't see it happening. I think transit as a mode of transportation, maybe not dead, but it definitely was not worth the investment prior to COVID, but it's really fallen on hard times due to the COVID-19 and the way workforces are changing. Just to give you an idea where things are, 2017, 811,000 people rode the train. That dropped to 2018 to 771,000. 2019, 744,000. Then in 2020, when COVID starts and the train was shut down for much of the year, 143,000. It's back up in 2021 to 186,000. Now, we know things were not normal in 2021, but I guarantee you look at the train early morning, late afternoon, it is not much more crowded than it was throughout COVID. I just think that while we were spending a lot of money on very little benefit before, the cost benefit situation for the rail runner and all the transit systems in this state and around the country has just gone way down. It's worse than it's ever been.
Yeah, no question. And then, Paul, as gasoline's now in the 4 range, if it goes to 5 or 6, that could be a short-term boost to transit, possibly. But COVID has definitely unleashed Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other forms of remote meeting, and a lot more people, even for national corporations, are allowed to work at home long term. And we talked a little bit about that. And so the price and the cost of that to a society relative to the benefit compared to additional transit, it's not looking like, transit was under a tough situation from an economic benefit before, and now that other alternatives have really come into their own, it'll be interesting to see. Or will we just dump more money into it and say, you know what, there was a proposal I've heard at the legislature. Well, we need the rail runner to go all the way from Las Cruces and all the way to Raton. So it's kind of like that's losing money on each unit you sell and trying to make it up in volume. But again, we'll see what happens, because transit is not necessarily, held to the same standard as almost every other form of spending, even government spending.
Yeah, maybe in sometime in like June or something. Who knows how long this current spike will last, how bad it'll get. All these kinds of things remain in the future, so we don't really know where will ultimately be. There's people saying gas could go to $7, $8 a gallon here. It's already basically there in California. If there's anything that could help transit, at least in the short term, it is the outrageously high price of gasoline. But if you're not forced to make that commute on a day-to-day basis, I suspect it's not going to matter that much to you, which leads me to the final point, which is the very best thing for the environment, for people's pocketbooks, and for even workplace productivity, to the extent that they can get what they need to get done from the comfort of their home or on Zoom. The changing workforce is really a win for a lot of people. It's just a big loser for these transit systems where you have to sit for hours on end to go from Albuquerque up to Santa Fe, as one example. So
no question, Paul. We'll see what's going to happen. I know I've said this before, but in the words of Yogi Berra, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. But the future is coming one day at a time. And with regard to these transit systems and the big money put into them, we will see in the not too distant future what's going to happen with that.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com. or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube and Rumble channels. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.